Mm. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy you've taken the time to be with us today. Time is maybe the one thing we can control. So the fact that you're with us here and want to learn and engage by incredible leaders is an absolute honor and privilege. So thank you for your attendance and your participation. Let's talk a little bit about our flow. We are going to have a really robust conversation about how we lead today in today's complex environment, and about humane, compassionate leadership and why that's so powerful and so important in today's complex world. We'll do a few introductions, and then we'll go to conversation, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please put the questions in either the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll do my very best to follow up and get there and answer your incredible questions. Who am I? My name is Lisen Stromberg. I am a culture and transformation consultant, advocate, expert, if you want to even call me that. I'm also the author of a new book, which is somewhere on my desk. Here we go. Intentional Power, the 6 essential leadership skills for triple bottom line impact. And I am a lecturer at Stanford University on modern leadership. I am going to have our guests or our leaders introduce themselves in a minute, but I wanted to put us some context before we got to our conversation. And that is that really we are fundamentally in a shift of what leadership looks like. And it's so challenging to be a leader right now. The shift that we're talking about is a shift from, to get a little wonky, shareholder capitalism, i.e. profits as the #1 driver, to stakeholder capitalism. The Business Roundtable in 2019, which is the 100 global biggest companies in the United States and around the world, got together and they said, it's really important that we start looking beyond just profits. And they changed the purpose. They really redefined the purpose of the corporation to be about meeting the needs of more than just profits, but actually people, planet, culture, communities, all the things we work around. And they didn't do this just because they're nice people. They did it because there's so much pressure, right? So right now, 76% of global consumers say that they will only buy from a brand that they believe is actually walking the talk and purpose-driven. Investors, 42% of investors, yes, we've got woke, anti-woke stuff going on, but the truth of the matter is, even today, 42% of investors believe that purpose-driven companies actually deliver better results. A lot of your customers are asking for diversity, supplier diversity. They're asking for what are you doing for your employees and for the planet. Employees want to actually understand, and they'll actually shift. In fact, there's one research I saw that 57% of employees would leave your company and go somewhere else if they believe the culture was better somewhere else. And then, as we probably all know, as of 2025, 77%, just take a moment and add that math, 77% of the workforce will either be millennials or Gen Zs. And then you know all the research around how there's a very different mindset there in terms of the current leadership and what actually companies and employees and expectations have for these job candidates. So today, we're going to talk about how do we lead in this complex, pressure-filled environment with so much going on. And I couldn't be more honored and proud to have Matt Wilkerson and our friend here, Bradley Knox, telling us a little bit about themselves and engaging the conversation. So maybe Matt, you want to introduce yourself first?
Thank you, Lisen. My name's Matt Wilkerson. I'm the co-founder CEO of Paragon One, and we have developed what we call the remote externship. It's essentially a real work experience with integrated learning. And we do it last year, we actually served about close to 9,000 student externs on multi-week externships for Fortune 500 brands and startups. And our big mission is to provide professional experience for anyone from any background all across the world. So excited to chat with you today.
Mm-hmm. And I'm proud to be an advisor to Paragon One. Thank you. Brad, how about you?
Well, I'll start with that as well. I'm very proud to be an advisor to Paragon One, and I'm excited about what we're doing together. So my background, I was an Air Force attorney, a JAG. Before that, I was a co-founder of a tech company, and then I ended up working in DC on Capitol Hill for the Congressional U.S. House of Small Business Committee. I was chief counsel there. And then for the last 17 years, I've been working for Aflac in the government affairs space, and now the corporate affairs. I run our corporate affairs business here in DC. So that's been a fun experience and a fun ride.
You've had so many hats. It's amazing. I love hearing about your past. So, Brad, I'll start with you. You know, given the environment that we're in right now and given what you're seeing, do you think, what are some of the biggest challenges leaders are facing today?
So Lisa, I really think some big challenges that leaders are facing, first and foremost, are with themselves. It is the ability to maintain a grounding in a very uncertain environment. And as leaders, we're supposed to provide that forward direction and vision and all of that. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, if we're not certain ourselves, if we don't have our own compass as to what is the right path forward, it can be wearing on who we are as leaders. And yet our goal and our job is to give to those who we're leading. And that becomes a challenge. There's so many leaders who are burned out. One of the things I talk to leaders about, when they come and ask, we have these conversations, is I'm asking, what are you doing to refresh yourself? How do you repair yourself? Because if you don't put your own mask on first, right, you got to do that before you put it on anyone else. You're not as effective as a leader. I also think we're dealing with, our workers, our teammates being burned out. We're all doing more with less, right, under the banner of efficiency. Except that efficiency can only go for so long before people just burn out.
Right.
And you can't keep asking people to do more with less, with little recognition and sometimes even less reward. So I think those are some major challenges that we're facing in the workplace today.
Yes, 100%. Matt, you're in a different workplace environment, right? Brad's in a big, large corporation. You're at a startup and dealing with students, but also clients that are big companies and startups. What do you think, in your experience, are some of the biggest challenges leaders are facing?
We don't really face any challenges. Pretty chill.
Oh yeah, life's easy, right? Exactly. We all want to be you.
Yes, the startup world is got a lot of challenges. I think about this concept of problem culture fit and how you build that, and it's the idea of bringing together a group of people who have a really deep passion around a problem. We talk a lot about product market fit within startups, but building a culture and a team that's passionate about a problem and can build trust among one another and work together, because there's so many things that and decisions that it's important that leaders do make, but also that leaders do not make, and let their team make those decisions and come to an agreement. And there's a really good framework that some of you may have heard of, developed by Patrick Lencioni, called the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And so it starts with trust. Build trust, then you're able to have productive conflict, and then you can commit to actions and commitments together. You can then have accountability across the team and eventually have results. And so I think that really investing in those foundations first and foremost is oftentimes the most challenging, I think, for a lot of leaders when you're trying to move fast. But it goes back to the very beginning from the standpoint of a startup. From day one, what are you intentional about? Who are those first few people you bring around? And really deeply thinking about that culture you want to build.
I love that. And I want to build off something you just mentioned and talked about. One of the things I want to talk about is kind of your personal definition of success. But before we go there, I want to ask you about trust. So there are so many ways you define trust and you develop trust, right? Francis Frey talks about trust as being a triangle, right? How do I, do you believe I care about you, right? That's one of the elements. Do you believe I have the knowledge that you need to, or I need, and we need to do the work? And am I walking the talk? In other words, am I actually doing those things, right? Are those aligned? How are you each building trust on your own teams?
Yeah, happy to start with that. So we're a fully remote culture, and I think there's a ton of benefits to that, and that's a big part of who we are. The challenge there is you're not as much in person. Now, last year we tried to do a number of events in person to get people together, and those were great. They were kind of high impact experiences, but the key is building that relationship first, making sure that people, especially people that are working very closely together, get to know one another, get to know the diversity of backgrounds that we have on our team, and try to understand where someone's coming from. I think that's the first thing. But also we really make sure to build certain rituals into what we do. One thing we really celebrate our appreciations, and making those, either in a weekly or bi-weekly meeting. We celebrate also just the work that we do with our students, and really try to make that public and clear to everyone. And so helping everyone see the relationship that they have with the problem that we're solving, and how each other's relationships intersect there. I think that's just very important to keep emphasizing with teams, and then yes, actually show them and dive in where it's needed. If there's something you need to get in the weeds on, making sure that you're rolling up your sleeves and you're working with the team, and then being transparent with them about where you're heading. So if it's, hey, here's how much runway we have, or here's the profitability that we're in, here's if there's a risk that's coming up that needs to be mitigated, being very transparent with the team about that.
Brad, how about you?
Yeah, I just have to follow on that. I mean, I'm glad, Matt, you mentioned Lencioni's work. We utilize that work in our team as well. So, I mean, from a startup to, a Fortune company, people are people, right? And there's this category, this label of trust, but within that, there are all these sub pieces of what people latch onto for what trust means to them. And certainly transparency is part of that, but exemplifying the things that you're saying, Lisen. I mean, am I walking the talk? Am I holding myself accountable? But beyond that, I think maybe before that, I think leaders have to cast a master vision of where they want the team to go. And if people can buy into that, it's the first element of whether they can give themselves to trust into that. And then the other pieces of, do I trust that person's competence? Do I trust their confidence? Do I trust, all these different elements that lead up to, okay, I'm going to give myself to this work and to this effort. And so for me, you hit on it, and you didn't tee it up for this, but you hit on it in your book, the hard I, hardy. I mean, those elements, you can't have a conversation about leadership anymore without talking about resilience, without talking about empathy, without talking about being humble. And not every leader, lots of leaders aren't humble, right? I mean, you don't have to have that to be in leadership. But what people want, and I think what people relate to, is someone that feels like the other person cares about them. And you can be a complete jerk, but if you feel like I care about you, you don't care about the rest of them. Right. And if I can convince you that our vision is true, it's big enough it's bigger than me, and I need your help. And if I can treat you with mutual respect, so even if I'm the leader, you know that I hear you and I care what your opinion is, and we're going to move forward together, you're going to give me more than you would generally give someone else.
And all the research completely validates that, right? We see it. Like, they're 2 times more likely to work harder and be more productive when they can buy into that vision, when they actually have a role to play and understand their role. You're absolutely right. Brett, I want to thank you for mentioning the book and mentioning Hardy. And let me tell our attendees what is. So we did all this research to understand what are those really, truly top of the line, best in class skills that modern leaders, not traditional leaders, right? Because these were different skills. What do modern leaders need? And all our research, interviewing thousands of global leaders and doing all kinds of surveys, came down to 6 essential skills. And those are humility. And actually, I think that H is also humanity. We'll talk about compassionate leaders. So we kind of humility/humanity, empathy, accountability. And we're not talking about, I'm just going to get my job done. We're talking about what Brad's saying here, which is I'm going to get my job done, and I'm going to make sure that the work that we're doing makes a bigger impact in the world at large, right? So that's what accountability is. We actually call it 300% accountability. Resiliency, right? Self-care, the ability to fail and then get back up again. Transparency. Matt, you talked about that so beautifully, right? I need to be transparent with my team to help them understand where we're going and where we are. And then inclusivity, right? If you can't, and today's leaders, you've got to be inclusive. We want those diverse teams. We want those different mindsets, those different skills and abilities, and we call it Hardy. So that's kind of the big picture. When you think about that list, we've talked a little bit about it, but on a day-to-day basis, Brad, are there examples of where you're putting kind of that Hardy leadership, that compassionate leadership in action with your teams? Are the things that you're doing? I'm thinking here about grace. Hint, hint, our pre-talk.
Yes, let me think here. Yes, so we I think last year, and prior years we've had like a watchword for the year, but last year our watchword was grace. I had us all go through a book by Gary Burnison, who's the CEO of Korn Ferry, called The 5 Graces. And it's really a great book. And he talks about things as some of these same elements, right? Humility and resilience and courage, and it takes for us to give each other grace, meaning extending an opportunity for someone to either fail and recover, or assume the best intent, because it's so easy to assume the worst intent, especially if someone has failed in the same way before. Oh, they did it to me once, I'm not going to let them do it to me again. Okay, then have the courage to have a candid conversation respectfully, based on the mission that we're both going after, right? And I think there's opportunity grace doesn't mean rolling over. It doesn't mean, I think grace actually requires accountability. In order to offer it, you have to know that other person is capable of performing. That's the gap in expectations, right? So that's been something really important for us. And what's cool for me is I hear my teammates talking about grace amongst each other.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. Matt, how about you? When you're thinking about your day-to-day, kind of leading your team, when you think about those skills, one of the things you shared with me, which I just so loved, is that you've changed your leadership style. You've changed how you approach being a leader, certainly from your last startup to your current startup. Talk a little bit about that transition and what made you change and what you're doing differently now.
Yeah, I joke that my first startup experience, where I was co-founder, is kind of like the TV show Silicon Valley on HBO. You ever seen that?
I'm so sorry for you.
There's like an episode from that show. Was a first-time founder, with a few years of work experience under my belt, but it was just much more of I think kind of much more of a reactive culture, a lot of activity, probably not as much long-term vision, strategic thought. We raised a lot of money. You raise money, you spend it, right? Whether you need to or not. Had a lot of expectations from a lot of, I would say, kind of, big egos around the board, because we'd raise a lot of money from a lot of big names. And less of this kind of focus on experimentation and wanting to spend that time to learn and pivot, and being, I think, also too married to the solution as opposed to the problem, right? So being really in love with the problem, and not cultivating a culture around that. So we had hired a lot of amazing people, but it didn't necessarily mean we had everyone who was a cultural fit. And so learned a ton. And now I think we've been much more married to the problem. I mean, just by fact that I think we've, in the past, like we've gone through a bunch of pivots because we're highly focused on solving this problem in the right way until we get it right. And this problem being, how do you provide work experiences and professional experience and help everyone discover and launch their career? So now I think it's just being intentional about who we hire, really, really thoughtful, how they connect to the problem, how they connect to the culture, and giving a lot more autonomy to the team to go and make decisions. Doesn't mean that, you don't at times dive in, but you dive in where it's important, right? Where it is important for you as a leader to be steering things, to understand what's going on, and to also be learning directly from the customer, the user, what's happening, and then giving clarity and letting your teams run as fast as possible.
You're feeding into a question that I want to follow up with. Brad, I want to hear first, I want to hear from you about your journey as a leader and how it's evolved in all these different environments, right? What's happened for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when I was a captain, Air Force captain, I was walking down the hallway with my boss, who was a major at the time, and he had just told me about some pronouncement from, high
On
up.
high.
Yeah. And I was so irritated, and I'm just barking, and we're walking to the next meeting, and he stops like mid-step, turns around, and he says, "Captain, tell me, what meeting did you miss?" And I had to stop and think, oh, yeah, there's like a whole lot of people between me and that decision that I may not know all the information. And it informed me as a leader to realize not everybody's going to understand the decisions that are made, but it is my obligation to try to best communicate not just what the decision is, but why the decision is, to the degree that I can. You can't always do that because when the further away you are, you might not see all the details in the on the ground. But it also reminds me to talk to the people on the ground. Right. So as Matt talked about, having giving people autonomy, I tell my teammates, every single one of my teammates, I don't care what their role is, they are owners of the business. And whatever their role is, they own that business. And so I go to them and ask for their opinions about whatever it is that's going to affect the business, because that's what they're doing every day. And so that experience really taught me to be more thoughtful about that. I'm not great. I've got a lot more learning to do about it.
We all do. We all do.
And then the other thing is, I used to, I've always, been a reader of leadership books and a student of leadership, and thought, I need to be more like these leaders that are being talked about or who are writing. And one day, a mentor of mine said, you can't be those people. You are who you are, and your life story itself is your leadership story. And so it forced me to really go back and look at my own life history and develop my leadership philosophy based on who I already am. And that was very liberating for me, Lisen.
I'm writing that down because I'm going to quote you. Because everyone take this, your life story is your leadership story. I love that.
Listen, I have to attribute that quote to a gentleman named Doug Conant, who's the former CEO of Campbell Soup. He's the one, but to your point, it was so profound. It really was a major factor for me.
I love that. One of the things, the questions, I've kind of been tracking the questions that are coming up in Q&A. And one of the themes I'm reading is, what do you, like you had talked, Matt, so beautifully about kind of autonomy to the team, letting them, and Brad, you said the same thing, like they are the owners of their roles and they're the business, right? Their portion of the business. Isaac has asked this question, what do you do when your team is lagging behind you? What do you do when they're not performing as you might hope? How do we navigate? How do we be compassionate leaders in that environment? What does that look like? Matt, can you start there and talk about how you do that? What happens?
Well, I think the first thing is listening, right? So they should have the most amount of information on what's
Right.
happening.
Transparency.
And so really just trying to understand the situation, because there's so many factors, right? It could be something happening in the market. It could be, listening to our customers, right? Listening to the users, right? Starting first with who we're serving, and then just working backwards and saying, all right, well, if there was a goal that we had, because we set very ambitious goals all the time, and we don't always hit all those goals. And it's not because we don't want to, it's because we push ourselves to do things, to learn and see what the limits are, come back and, digest that, come up with some creative solutions and move forward. So, as long as you know that you have people on your team that, again, are super, super connected to the problem and very much, have that growth mindset. They want to learn, they want to push themselves, they want to set a high bar for themselves. Then you have the right ingredients, and it's just, it's regrouping and saying, all right, well, we set these goals. Now, we had these assumptions, we learned these things. Turns out like maybe we were projecting a little too much on this one. Maybe here we didn't set it as ambitious a goal, and then recalibrate and move forward. So, and you're just doing that all the time, right? You're constantly doing that.
Right. How about Brad? How about for you?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts, Lisen. And not necessarily in order, but my first thought is, as a leader, you have to take you have to be accountable. So the question is, why are they lagging? Have I not made something clear? Is there something, as Matt says, there's something in the market or something happening that's causing that? Sometimes as leaders, the toughest or the biggest challenge for us is waiting for our teams to catch up. We're the ones with the vision and we're moving forward, but we have to make sure we've got in place the things that they need to keep up or catch up. And so do they have the resources that they need? I generally think, and this goes back to grace, right? The mindset is, it's easy to say, well, they're not doing enough. And that's easy to do. The question that I would say is, when you hired them, do you think they wanted to give their best?
Right.
And if we assume that people want to give their best, then let's dig in around why they might not be at. What we might find, and this gets back to the humanity, the H, is, are they having issues at home? Are they having personal challenges? Are there things that we can identify to be helpful? One of the things that I do with my team is, when I took over 7 years ago, the company was gracious to me and afforded me an executive coach, which at the time was really only specially identified for certain executives. After a year of that coaching time, I realized how important it is. And I made that team available, the coaching team available to my entire team, from my administrative assistant to my VPs.
Wow.
And because if they can be better personally and professionally, they're going to produce more and produce better. And they're going to realize that there is an intentional investment in who they are as a person, not just how many more widgets they can turn out.
Exactly right. One of the things I want to build off of this question that I was asking, and you've observed, why aren't they doing it? Why aren't they, whatever? And when I am working with my clients, I'm always asking them, well, if I hear that question, it's like, to your point, do they have the information they need, right? Do they have the resources they need? Do they have all the tools they need? Do they have the skills for what you're asking them for? And then what else is going on that's keeping them? So that's the one question. And then it's shifting it to as you've said, when I talk about 300% accountability, and then it's realizing that if that individual, for whatever reason, might be an issue at home, maybe they don't have the skills, can someone else in the team step and be 300% accountable? Because it's the team then can make an impact. And one day Lisen might be killing it, but the next day not so much, but that's okay because Brad's going to step in and he's got things. It's like that baton passing back and forth. If we don't get to that mindset and we're siloed, we're failing our teams, I think.
No, I completely agree with that. And we talk about that on our team, which is as a team, it's like I wouldn't want an individual on our team to say, oh, wow, Matt really blew it. Man, too bad for Matt.
Right.
No, absolutely not. If the team has a unified and shared mission and vision and goal, then we all should care about Matt dropping the ball. And let's go and help Matt pick that ball up and move it forward and not worry about the credit. And let's get the job done. But it is important. And this is what I love so much about what Matt said earlier. The recognition and the shared appreciations are so important. We do every year we have an annual retreat, and then mid-year we do a mid-year summit, and then in between we have quarterly check-ins. And during those times, we do peer-to-peer appreciations, and we just go around and it's such a powerful tool to say what I appreciate about Matt, what I appreciate about Lisen, because we don't hear that a lot, and some people in their personal lives don't hear it at all. So it's really a powerful tool that modern leaders recognize the importance. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of old school leaders out there, but I think the employee engagement scores reflect that the old style leadership it's not working. And companies are wondering, how do we keep people engaged? How do we keep them how do we keep them longer than 18 to 24 months? And all of this, that's a whole nother discussion, Lisen,
but it is, and it's similar, right? It's like as you're talking about, if I believe, back to trust, that you're investing in me, then I'm going to actually stay because I want to grow. There's the self-interested piece, right?
Right.
But Matt, how are you doing it in your startup world? How is it showing up for you? One of the questions is around ownership. But before we get to that, you talked about affirmations and acknowledgements, and how are you embedding that into Paragon on a daily basis? Is there a system that you have? Like, what's the tool? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, we do weekly all hands meetings.
Yeah.
Where we generally, at least every other week, try to make that a good chunk of the time. Sometimes it'll be over Zoom, sometimes it'll be over Slack and maybe a combination. But we also had a fun awards session at the end of last year. And we just try to mix it up. I think there's that, but there's also showing it through giving people the responsibility and the ownership that they want and the flexibility. I mean, a big thing, part of our culture is this, we are remote. And so we want to make sure that people have that flexibility to do their jobs. And if they need to, do pick up and drop off of kids, or they want to, work somewhere for, and travel the world while they're working, or whatever that is, it kind of goes back to that trust of just letting people create the framework that they want. But yeah, I think that this is something that it has to be constant. You have to keep remembering that a lot of people are, as Brad said, experiencing all sorts of things in their lives that come up, personal challenges. And so we have a team that's, I believe, amazing in that they will step up for each other and jump in. And it's not one of these like, well, that's not my responsibility, or that's, it's not on my job. That's not what I was hired to do. That doesn't really exist. And I see it, I hear about it constantly. And that comes from a lot of our appreciations, where I get a chance to hear how other teams are interacting, and how they're stepping up for one another.
This is a key point, Lisen, because as a startup, and you're hiring people for this company, but even in a big company like I'm in, it comes down to being intentional about who you're hiring.
Yes.
And one of the things that we talk about on our team is we've developed some team norms. And one of those, part of that mentality of our team norms is we don't do lone rangers. We don't have individual contributors. We have teammates who support each other, and we vet that at the hiring point. We explain who we are as a company and who we are as a team, what our team norms are, and you set your standard of what you want, and then you hire to that, so that you can. It doesn't know not every. Sometimes people get through, but then they don't stay because too often I think people hire for the talent and the skill, and not for the culture.
That is a home run message. Absolutely. One of the things that I see often in the clients I advise is they might have this incredibly talented, oh my God, rock star who's delivering the profits, delivering whatever it is to the client, whatever it might be, but is so toxic to the culture. And the rub is I have to be willing to let that person go, either try and train them because, you want to assume good intentions, you want to give grace. There might be a reason for this behavior. But if you still aren't seeing change, then you've got to let them go. Have you been in that situation? Each of you, Matt, have you been in that situation? You've had to let go of a toxic rock star?
Yeah. No, I definitely have been through these situations in the past. And I think over time you just learn it's never worth it.
Right.
Like
At the end of the day.
You and then you're like, well, but this time they're so critical. And I've always come away just saying, no, it's never, ever, ever worth it.
Yeah. And Brad, have you had that same experience?
Similar,
Yeah.
very talented people that for one reason or another, it just wasn't the right mix. And not to demonize anyone, but I think you have to put the team and the culture first. And when you do that, because you can also lose some of your other talented people, because what they see is what you've put first is the performance over what you're talking about with culture. And like you said, you have to walk the talk. And sometimes, as Matt said, every time it's it's better to choose the team over the rock star.
I want to just build off of that. So I had the absolute privilege of working with the Billie Jean King Foundation and also Information to look at, which is a nonprofit focused on supporting women of color in corporate America. And we did a nationwide survey of knowledge worker corporate American women in corporate America, women of color in corporate America. And what we learned that one of the number one reasons that they ended up leaving their workplace wasn't, sexism, blah, 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 racism, blah, blah, blah. It often was there was that one person that was so toxic to the culture and the leaders were unwilling to let that person go. And that sent the message that performance, i.e., driving bottom line, results was more important than creating the culture that ultimately would create the results that they wanted to leave. And that was literally one of the number one reasons they left. So you're spot on there.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Let's shift to actually focusing on inclusivity and what that looks like. Boy, is it getting a bad name. I don't know if you've been following on X, which I'm trying not to follow, the fight between Elon Musk and Mark Cuban around, anti-woke and DEI and everything else. And yet all the research still reinforces that diverse voices, diverse points of view, et cetera, are vital. How are each of you navigating this in making sure that you're hiring and bringing on the team that's going to be the right team? What's it look like for each of you?
Well, I'll jump in here. So to me, it fundamentally in the argument is that if you have a diverse candidate, that somehow that candidate is inferior. And that's still a pervasive thought today. So why, if you're doing something different to allow for someone. However, the quality of students across university platforms, and what Matt and Paragon One have done to be intentional about curating high talented students from the non-traditional pool of schools, is so important.
Yeah.
And because it's about giving opportunities to people who are absolutely qualified and often more qualified, overqualified in some cases, and yet just having a space and a place to compete. And so it's nonsense to me, the whole argument about DEI and being woke and all that. It's absurd to me, because really, if companies wanted to do their best, they would simply be more intentional about where they hire their talent from, regardless of what they look like.
Right, right, exactly. And not just it's expediency partly. Oh, it's just easy,
That is correct.
and it takes time, and that's hard.
They don't want to invest the time. And
Yeah.
so big companies, they have their HR teams, and they've got their
Sure.
university recruiting teams. Well, they can only go to so many universities, they can only go to so many job fairs, right? And so there's a limitation to that. So to your point, it's easy. They don't, why do something hard? Well, because doing something hard is the right thing in this case, and expanding their aperture to look at more candidates would actually solve a lot of their pipeline problems, but they can't get out of their own way. But this is where I'm going to segue to Matt, because he saw this and as a solution for it. And so this is why we get to be excited about being advisors, right, Lisen?
It's so true, Matt. It's so, I mean, Brad knows we're like all in. but Matt, talk a little bit about, how you're doing it with your own team and being intentional with your own team, but also how you're seeing companies and managers navigate this conversation. So let's start with your own team and then go broader.
Yeah. I think of diversity in so many different ways. It's, I think people like to try to focus, a lot of the attention just gets placed on, well, what's the race of someone? It's, that's a piece of it, but it's so much of it is, what is the background? What is the experience that somebody had, right? Where did they come from? And also diversity of thought. So, I mean, all of these, I think, make up at least how I think about it. And because we've been remote, it's enabled us to go really anywhere. And so we can get back again to that hyper focus of problem culture fit and say, now let's find the people who are incredibly passionate about the problem that we're solving and get them from anywhere. And because the problem that we're solving is so complex, I mean, it's a really hard problem that no one has truly solved yet. How do you deliver real work experiences at scale as a form of education and training? It actually requires you to have, I mean, we could not build what we're building without a highly diverse team.
Right.
Right. It just isn't possible.
Right.
And so it is imperative that we go and find people from all sorts of, not just career backgrounds, worlds of education, technology, consulting, all of these different fields, but also who have very different experiences in life where they see different angles of the students who we're serving, the companies that we're serving, the needs of education leaders. So that's how we've thought about the team. And then we've invested again in these rituals. We have our own set of values that one of the first value that we talk about is our customers and users come first, and then the company, and then the team, and then the individual. Not because the individual isn't important, but because it's about how we make decisions, and that's how we align that diversity of thought together.
Right. It's purpose. You align it with purpose. right? Are we aligned there? How are you seeing it with your students and the relationship with the managers? How are companies looking at this right now? And, you're on the ground, boots on the ground, dealing with this. What are you seeing?
Well, in the last year, you've definitely had a lot of companies that I think they're struggling with how to address this, because on the one hand, they may have said we want to build a more diverse pipeline, but then you've obviously had the rulings with affirmative action, just kind of the whole political landscape, especially in the US, that has been very polarizing. And so I think a lot of companies are kind of like, we don't know how to really address this.
Right.
A lot of our large partners who we've worked with in the past have been, they've allocated budgets and initiatives to say, how do we go out and build a pipeline of underrepresented, underserved candidates and populations that we're not engaging with as much. And so we're continuing to work with all of those partners. 100% of them have said they want to continue working with us into 2024. So that's been fantastic. But then we're also seeing a lot of companies that are still trying to figure out, and they're kind of they're not able to make a decision right now. So what we're doing, though, is we're not relying on just the largest Fortune 500, Fortune 1000s out there to say, hey, we want to build a diverse pipeline. We're just saying we're doing it ourselves. So we're going to companies, big and small, everywhere, to build into this marketplace of work experiences, and now going out and bringing as many students as we can. And so this year we're really ramping up the number of students that we're bringing in, giving these experiences, so that over time, that kind of chorus of the value that these experiences bring, not just to the students, but to the companies, and showing them, hey, you can actually drive insights from a group of students. Like,
right.
The assumption is, well, if I have interns, it's going to take a lot of work, and maybe it's not worth the effort. And, I've got my day job. That's kind of the traditional way of thinking, but we're starting to show, actually, there is a way to engage large numbers of young, talented students, and some are going to, maybe do great work. Some are going to struggle and learn and mess up, and that's okay. Like, they shouldn't be, penalized for that.
Right.
But that building that pipeline will help your teams get insights, but also can be a pipeline for the future. So yeah, anyways, something we're super excited about, and I could probably talk about for an hour.
I
Hey,
love
Lisa,
it. Yeah.
Lisa, if I can follow on it, one of the things, and again, Matt, it's just awesome what you're doing and what the Paragon One team is doing. But Fortune companies are just wrapped around the axle, trying to figure out what to do, and it really, to me, it's really easy. Stop thinking of it as diversity. It's
Right.
not some
It's
special
business.
category.
Yeah,
It's business.
exactly.
Go intentionally recruit at HBCUs. Stop calling it a diversity program. They're just students who are qualified to do the work.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Go and create training programs for people for AI or new things that you're doing, and find them from every place.
Everywhere.
It's really simple, but they're so afraid of activists and lawsuits, and just do your business and expand where you get people from. It's that simple. And unfortunately, it's hard for people to get out of their own way sometimes.
Well, I want to honor that. And I also want to say something, give a note of hope. And many of the clients I work with, they haven't skipped a beat. It's like, of course, we're going to actually embed all of these practices and programs into what we do, because that's good business. Boom, full stop. I don't, it hasn't changed from 2022 to 2024.
Right.
Nothing's changed. We
That's
got to
right.
do good business, right? Let's keep moving. I want to switch. I have more questions to ask you, but I actually want to honor, we've got a lot of really great questions coming up, and I want to make sure I'm honoring them. One of them that I think is really interesting, it says, are you seeing companies change their bonus or promotion practices to incentivize team behavior? In other words, are systems and programs changing to actually help managers become the leaders we want. And I'll shift this another way. I was interviewed for a book about kind of modern allyship, modern leadership yesterday. And the question really came down to individuals might change, but is the system that corporate systems that individuals are working in, have those changed to actually reward modern leaders? So how are you seeing, okay, that's the question. So how are you seeing that show up or not show up? And what could companies do?
Well, so I'm shaking my head because I just over and over and over we see, top leaders get escorted out for numerous reasons, and they get hired for performance,
Right.
but not really leadership, because they leave for lack of leadership. And there's an assumption that because they've elevated to whatever their position is, that we somehow naturally become great leaders because we get elevated. And in fact, leadership is something that has to be learned. It is earned and learned.
Yes.
And I find that companies at the highest levels still don't hire for leadership. They just hire for performance. And I don't know, maybe there are some companies that have built into their HR platforms some sort of metric around, around that. I can tell you for us, like employee engagement scores, that matters. I mean, it's a reflection of you as a leader and how are you taking care of your team. So that's, it's looked at, but it's not necessarily a formal metric. But I work for a company. The CEO, his motto is, if you take care of the employees, they'll take care of the business.
Exactly.
But leadership, that's top down, right? If you don't work for an organization like that, you're probably not going to have that experience.
How about for you, Matt? How are you seeing embedding kind of the behaviors that you want into your systems at Paragon One? Yes, you're a startup, but you still have systems, right?
Yeah. Well, because we're still a relatively small team, the focus for us, at least I believe, is are you working on something where you're learning, growing, and it's challenging you? I mean, everyone we attract, you don't come to a startup certainly for security. You don't come to want, you come because you want to be pushed, you want to grow faster than you might in another scenario. And so I think that's the first thing is, are you constantly challenged? I don't, there's this sort of assumption that, well, to be progressing, I need to like become manager and then a leader, and I got to have like people under me. And for some people that is the case because they have the skill set or the desire, the passion to do that. But for other people, that's not the case. That doesn't have to be the case. Some people, either aren't great at or don't want to, or not super passionate about having to manage people, because that comes with another set of priorities that you have to juggle, and they might just be like fantastic at executing the core of what they do. And so but there needs to be other progression points for them to take on new and more challenging opportunities. And so I think it's just also looking at individuals, understanding what they want, and then as best as possible, you can't always do this, especially at a small team, but as best as possible, try to align that with what the needs of the team are.
Right.
And so we always try to say, look, like here's where we're going, here's our objectives, here's what we got to get done, here are the problems we have to solve. And if you can step up and help with that, raise your hand, say, hey, I want to get more involved. I mean, it's always tough because everyone's got so much on their plate, but we want to hopefully make room for that, or give a pathway for that to happen. And if it's responsibility, or in our case, we're a startup, so equity is somewhat of a motivator. Probably some motivator for some people more than others, but and in other people, they make obviously the cash salary that they're getting maybe more important. For other people, it could be, well, what am I actually owning and tackling, and what's my work? And usually it's some combination of those, but it might be weighted differently for different people. So that's how we think about it today.
I love it. One of the things you've talked about, both of you've talked about, which is, I just want to make sure we're explicit about this, is a growth mindset, right? We know, and all the research shows that actually, if you come with a growth mindset, these things work their ways out, right? We learn, right? We get better. We were quoting before Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better and then do better, right? So that's kind of how we operate. And that's part of grace as well, right? It's not just the
That's right.
individual, but it's also, we have more questions and really great things, but I want to make sure we get a chance to have you share one lightning round of what would you tell your younger self? Because we probably have a lot of students on here. What would you tell your younger self? What do you wish you knew then? Or what advice would you give your younger self? Brad, can you kick off there?
That was so long ago, Lisa.
Well, you're the youngest you're ever going to be right now.
That's right. I think it would be a couple things. One, be kind to yourself. Don't try to live someone else's life. And your journey has its own message, and it goes back to your life story is your leadership story. You can learn lessons from other people, but you have value in your own life. And the gifts and talents and skills and abilities that you have and that you will develop are going to be beneficial to other people because they're innate to you, and realize that has value in itself.
I love that. Right? That's beautiful. And how about you, Matt?
I agree with the be kind to yourself. That would be one I would say.
Yes.
I think another one is just really invest and think about the value of the relationships that you're cultivating at a young age, because it's, especially when you're in school, it's just kind of like, well, what am I learning and what am I doing next? And you don't have this sort of thought of what in a decade or two, how will those relationships matter, and just the richness that they provide. So I think investing and thinking about that, but also having patience with yourself and your goals, and knowing that you don't have to have it all planned out. And early on, you might do really great work later in life. There's a long arc, and just having kind of patience with the long-term vision.
I love that. When I talk to teams or companies, I talk about sort of seeding the meadow, right? If anyone gardens, you seed the meadow, but you're not sure which flowers are going to blossom, and you actually aren't even sure when they're going to blossom. So you might be seeding the meadow and something will come up that you never anticipated. And I love that as an opportunity, because there's things that you think you can control, and at the end of the day, you're not really sure you can always control them. So having the humility to say, we'll do our best, we'll set our mission, and we'll try to accomplish this. And sometimes, as you've done many times at Paragon, hey, we're going to shift, we're going to pivot, we're going to get refined here. And that's, I think, so essential. So I want to add that.
Big time.
Big time, right? Right, Brad? Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. And faith, right? I generally don't quote scripture. However, a lovely gentleman here, or human here, I'm not sure, Muhindu, has quoted a scripture from Luke and says, "For who is greater, one who reclines on the table or one who serves? It is not the one who reclines on the table, but I among you am the one who serves." I think if we come with that servant leadership, that mindset of who can we serve today while also caring for ourselves, is so foundational to best-in-class modern leadership. With that, I am so honored to have been with both of you today. Matt, can you sort of close us out and help us see what's next for Paragon One?
Yeah. Thank you. This was great. Really great discussion. I think this is a very important topic. A lot of what we talked about are things that I'm always trying to learn, get better at, and listen and hear how others are navigating leadership. For Paragon One, we are, I think 2024 is going to be, been telling our team, such a transformative year for everyone individually and for us as a team, because I think you're starting to now see this chorus, especially from higher education, saying, how do we how do we justify the ROI? How do we now build true career pathways and outcomes? And we think real work experience is the answer. And so I think once we figure this out with the externship, which we have been, and we bring companies and students and finally universities together, then it's going to transform how work and learning is done.
Right.
And so we're really trying to get in front of a lot of university leaders this year to introduce them to the externship and do more. So excited for that.
Mhm. Thank you both. Thank you,
Thank you,
Paragon
Lisa.
One, for all the work that you do. Brad, we'll see you again, and we'll be cheering from the sidelines. You, Matt, we're here for you, and the entire Paragon One team. Be well, everyone. Go ahead, go forth, lead on.
Thank
Thanks, all.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.